When you look at a cemetery, what do you see? To some people, the centuries-old headstones need only a light fog to become the perfect backdrop for a terrifying horror film. In my eyes, I see a place to relax and write a script in peace. During the daylight, of course. My college town in Athens, Ohio has a legend associated with its cemeteries. There are 5 major ones surrounding the campus, and rumor has it they line up perfectly to make a pentagram. This is why a town with less than 25,000 people ranked on USA Today's list of most haunted cities. Whether you choose to believe the ghostly stories is entirely up to you and will absolutely not affect today's story. I simply need you to imagine with me a very old graveyard from the 1800s. It's situated in rural Ohio, so on either side of the aged and cracked road rests a seemingly endless field of yellowed grass. It's late at night, and there's at best 1, maybe 2 street lamps providing just a sliver of light. Jessica Lynn Keene was 15 years old and blindly sprinted through the pitch-dark cemetery. Her heart pounded as sweat ran down her face, but she didn't care. It was refreshing after being stuck in the car for the past, who knows however many hours.
Get off the road, Jessica. Just get yourself away from this car.
Did she know she was entering Foster Chapel Cemetery? Perhaps. And if she didn't, she certainly would after she bumped into the sharp edge of the ancient tombstone. She hopped up and down on her foot, trying not to shout too loudly.
Whatever you do, don't let him hear you're over here.
She looked around. Could he see her? Did he even know she was in the graveyard? She took a few seconds to rip the duct tape from her mouth and stifled a gasp from the sharp, sudden pain.
Oh, that's a bit better.
You can't run forever, little girl.
His heavy footsteps were definitely closer than they had been. Jessica shivered, partly from fear, and partly because she was now in nothing but her bra and...
Where's my other sock?
She shook her head.
Oh, that doesn't matter now. Get help.
She couldn't see a damn thing, but that meant her hunter couldn't either. She ran as quietly as she could and knelt down behind another headstone. This one belonged to the Beach family.
You ain't getting far, girly. Not tied and barefoot.
Shoot, he's getting closer now.
Jessica desperately looked around to try to form some kind of plan. And then, like a lighthouse beckons ships to safe harbor, a light appeared at a nearby farmhouse. Again, remember, this is rural Ohio we're talking about.
I can't fight him, but maybe I can outrun him.
Jessica squinted as he got dangerously closer.
It's about a quarter mile. Cheerleading totally prepped me for stuff like this, right?
Jessica was about to take the most important run of her life. Welcome to Dead Time Stories.
And that completes the little tour of our home. I'm happy to answer any questions for you here in my office. Here's a chair for you, Jessica, and for you, Mrs. Smitley.
Her parents were divorced, by the way. That's why Jessica's mother's name was Smitley. Now, this overly peppy woman was named Becky Westerfeld, and she was the executive director of a group home cheerily referred to as the Huckleberry House. 2 weeks before Jessica sprinted through the fields of Madison County, she found herself here on the doorstep of the Victorian building. Now, to me, Huckleberry House looked like the home on the 90s sitcom Sabrina the Teenage Witch. But to Jessica, it might have looked like the start of a foul 2 weeks.
Now, looking at your sweet face, Jessica, I must say I'm a little surprised you're here.
Jessica's mother, Rebecca, sat a little higher in her seat and nervously pulled a strand of blonde hair behind her ear.
Yes, well, we both agreed that this was the best place for Jessica to be. Her grades have, well, they've slipped a little bit. Then, when the school called and said she quit cheerleading, I was a little more than shocked.
Oh dear, that's not good.
No, it's not. Sit up, Jessica.
Jessica did so and smiled at Becky.
I think my mother's more concerned about Sean than my grades or extracurricular activities.
Who's Sean?
The love of my life that my mother thinks is the absolute worst boy on this planet.
Well, honey, he's an 18-year-old dropout who ran into problems with the law. I don't think that's the type of boy you should be with.
Do we argue often?
Rebecca's fingers flexed on her purse. Hoping Becky wouldn't notice, she fixed a bright smile to her face.
We raise our voices to each other every now and then, but...
Oh yeah, we bitch each other out like every day.
Jessica!
What, Mom? The lady asked a question. Shouldn't we be honest?
Of course, but the language is not needed, sweetheart.
Jessica turned back to Becky and flapped her hand in defeat.
See, this is the type of shit that causes our fights. She thinks cuss words make you trashy and can't be a form of expression.
Well, they aren't.
I think you painted a clear picture, ladies. Thank you. Spats between mothers and daughters are absolutely natural, whether it's about boys, friends, or bad language. Give our program 2 weeks and we'll have Jessica's grades back up to our 4.0 and a happy home for you both. What do you say?
The women looked at each other, then turned back to Becky.
I think this is a perfect match.
A 2-week vacation from this pain? I'm sold.
Now that's the spirit. We'll just go over a few forms here, then the fun will begin. Jessica, why don't you look over this list of rules while Mom and I fill out the boring paperwork?
Jessica mindlessly twirled her hair as she read over the sheet.
11 o'clock curfew?
Oh, yes. You're allowed to roam free after the daily meetings. We won't ask where you've been as long as you're home safe in bed by 11 o'clock.
Jessica nodded, satisfied with this answer. And before she knew it, her mother was driving away.
Listen to me, I'm telling you the truth. I know. He saw me at the mall. We made eye contact.
There is not a detailed record of what Jessica did while at Huckleberry House, but I'd imagine it was something along the lines of attending meetings, talking through feelings, and trying to understand why parents treated their children a certain way. Oh, and that boy Jessica was madly in love with, Sean Thompson, well, I'm sure she called him too. Well, we know she at least called him once on Friday, March 15th.
Hello?
Hey, baby, it's me.
Chess, what's up, baby girl?
Oh, you know. I finished another round of therapy today. They think I'm improving a lot.
Cool. You still hot at your mama for dumping you out there?
I mean, yeah, baby. It's kind of crazy, but I realize now she did it because she loves me.
That's some real bullshit.
Babe!
So what? You keeping up your grades and quit cutting class? Cool. Then as soon as your mama find out you dated me again, she gonna send your ass right back to that call center.
You're not being fair.
Wow. They brainwashed you real quick, huh? Sorry, girl. We're done.
Did she hear that correctly? Was the future Mrs. Sean Thompson really single again? Jessica sniffled as she hung up the phone. Somebody may have handed her a tissue, or perhaps she just wiped her damp eyes on her sleeve. Like her time at Huckleberry House, the exact reasoning for why Sean broke up with her over the phone isn't known. But records agree she landed on one solution.
I'm going to the mall.
Ah yes, the Westland Mall. Now nothing more than an abandoned, post-apocalyptic reminder of a time long gone, was once a popular hangout for teenagers in 1991. Jessica purchased a few bus tickets and marched over to the Coda bus stop across the street from Huckleberry House. She could have been going just to blow off steam, or perhaps it was because she hoped to bump into Sean at the food court, but either way, she was growing impatient in the cold.
Where is this bus?
As if they could read her mind, a car slowly pulled up and rolled down its window.
Good evening, young lady. Bus is running late again?
Not wanting to appear rude, Jessica put on her best cheerleader smile.
No, I don't think so.
The driver checked his watch.
Gee, it's getting late. Delicate Daisy like you shouldn't be waiting alone.
He popped the passenger door open with a familiar grin. Jessica hesitated, but he leaned back confidently.
I'm cleaner and have less stops than a bus.
Nobody knows why, because usually...
Thank you so much.
Okay, cut to the chase. With a giggle, she got in the car with a total stranger. If she was really hoping to see Sean at the Westland Mall, maybe the bus was simply taking too long and she didn't care how dangerous this was. Jessica watched the houses pass by and soon realized the roads this guy was taking wouldn't lead them to the mall. Her heart started to beat just a little faster as she turned and saw the driver's knuckles clenched around the steering wheel. Was he nervous, or had he done something like this before?
I think the mall's back there.
Shut up and show me those tits.
You can surely see where this car ride was going. And this driver was definitely experienced when it came to taking advantage of young women. He tied Jessica's arms behind her back with duct tape before placing a piece over her mouth. He held the girl captive for no less than 6 hours, raping her over and over again.
Wait here. I gotta take a break.
The man returned to the driver's seat, leaving the terrified and revolted Jessica in the back with her bra twisted up around her neck. She looked up at the back door he'd foolishly left ajar, then up at his reflection in the rearview mirror as he wiped sweat from his brow.
This is my chance.
Jessica knew her escape window was limited. True, it was dark out, and yes, she was far from home, but that didn't mean she couldn't find somebody to help her. Thinking quickly, she kicked the car door open and bolted from the back seat.
Son of a bitch! Come back here!
It was painful to run on the asphalt in just her socks, but that was nothing compared to what he would do to her again. As she ran, adrenaline took over and she freed herself from her duct tape bonds, then ducked behind the headstones and nosed the light pop on in the far-off farmhouse.
It's about a quarter mile. Cheerleading totally prepped me for stuff like this, right?
He was definitely getting closer now. This was her only chance to get to the house and hope they'd help her out. So she ran.
Hell no!
The man took off after her. Jessica did her best to ignore him and focused only on the light streaming from the farmhouse.
Just get to the house, 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 just get to the house. Ow!
Being unfamiliar with the graveyard, Jessica had no idea the land was surrounded by an old fence. You know the kind. It's made of splintery wooden posts connected by barbed wire. It's the kind where if you run into it at full speed, it's guaranteed to knock you out. The farmhouse's lights slid from Jessica's view as the world faded to black. Rebecca was fast asleep with no idea the danger her daughter was in. Her pleasant dreams were interrupted by a... She rolled over and sleepily grabbed the phone.
Hello?
Hi, Mrs. Smitley. This is Becky from Huckleberry House. Did Jessica come home to you?
Rebecca suddenly felt like she drank 8 cups of coffee and sat bolt upright.
I asked because none of the counselors have seen her since our 4:30 group session. When she didn't come to the 8:30 one, we assumed she was out celebrating, almost being a graduate of the program. But then she missed the curfew.
I'll call her friends.
Rebecca tried her best to control her temper, but it was hard when all she could picture was Jessica walking hand in hand with one person, Sean Thompson. She venomously picked the phone back up.
This is not the time to be celebrating, young lady.
You've reached the Thompson family. Leave a message.
Hi, Sean. It's Rebecca, Jessica's mother. When you get this, give me a call back immediately.
Rebecca called a few of Jessica's close friends, but those that answered hadn't seen her since she left for the group home. It was late, and Rebecca knew she couldn't contact too many more people, so tried the police around midnight. It was going to be a long night, and all she could do was wait for...
Dear Lord, please let this be Jessica. Hello?
Good evening, ma'am. It's Sean. I got your call.
Is Jessica with you?
No, ma'am. Isn't she at the Huckleberry House?
She is supposed to be, Sean. Young man, if she's with you, I will not be mad and I will not ask questions. I just want to know my daughter's okay.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but I haven't spoken to her since about 5:30.
Rebecca's eyes fluttered.
Yes, I see. Thank you.
She mechanically hung up the phone and stared ahead blankly.
She's out there and going to call me any second now for a ride home.
The next day dragged on for Rebecca as she called her own friends for help finding Jessica. But still, there was no sign of her daughter. As Rebecca pulled down the bedspread for another night without sleep, she stopped and grabbed a pen and notepad from her nightstand.
Hello, God. I know I am not always a perfect Christian, but I'm writing to ask you to please send me a sign. Even if Jessica doesn't come home tonight, please let me know that she's okay.
I picture a light fog over Foster Chapel Cemetery. It's the Sunday morning after Jessica was reported missing, and now in the daylight, it's not scary or unwelcoming, but rather peaceful. A college student took advantage of the quiet as she walked through the grass and examined a few headstones. She rubbed the dirt and mildew from one of the etched letters, snapped a picture of it with a grin, and continued her morning trek, determined to get the photograph she needed for her latest project. She then spotted the bare foot sticking out from behind one of the headstones. Was it a drunk passed out from the night before? Or perhaps someone homeless and she was invading their territory? No. Something about this didn't feel right to her. So she cautiously approached.
Hello?
She carefully peered around the headstone and screamed as she got the shock of her life. This was way worse than she imagined. You and I, of course, know it was Jessica, but all this student saw was the bloody remains of a naked girl. Her head was so smashed up, it looked like it had been through a meat grinder. Forgetting all about the photography project, the girl ran as quickly as she could to a phone and notified police. Reports on the murder in the graveyard hit evening news stations all across Columbus, and one of Rebecca's friends happened to overhear the story as she was cooking dinner. Her eyes bulged out of her head as she dropped her wooden spoon and ran to turn up the volume.
Investigators don't quite know how Jane Doe arrived at the cemetery, but clumps of hair attached to the fence post indicated she was trying to run from her attacker, hit the post, and blacked out. Detectives also found 2 bloody pieces of a sandstone grave marker on the other side of the fence and presumed this delivered the blow that ended the young woman's life. Madison County Sheriff Jim Sabin is still working to identify the girl. And now, the weather.
Wasting no time, Rebecca's friend grabbed her cordless phone and dialed the worried mother.
You should turn on channel 6 and sit down.
When Rebecca watched the tragedy unfold before her eyes, the possibilities of what had become of Jessica zipped around inside her mind. She called police with an inkling that Jessica was the Jane Doe. Sheriff Jim Sabin paid Rebecca a visit. He scratched his graying buzz cut as the woman looked over the crime scene photos. Jim was used to these types of interviews and casually glanced around the room, taking note of anything that could prove useful. And then his gray eyes landed on a photo of the beautiful cheerleader, and he slowly nodded to himself.
That's our girl, all right.
His eyes shifted back to Rebecca as she shook her head.
No, there's no way that's my Jessica. Praise Jesus.
It was like she had been holding her breath for days. Jim, however, wasn't so sure.
Are you absolutely certain about that, ma'am?
Yes, I know my own daughter.
She angrily tossed the photos back.
Perhaps an in-person visit will reveal something else.
If that's what you want, fine.
Rebecca brought the man she was seeing at the time to the morgue. In this new environment, Jim decided it would be best for the mother to wait outside, while the man whose name history has ignored examined the body.
Well?
The man didn't glance at her, instead shaking his head. Not to say no, but rather in disbelief.
He recognized a scar on her finger, ma'am. There's no doubt that's your daughter in there. I'm gonna make sure we catch the monster who did this to her. You said she had a boyfriend?
Rebecca pulled herself together as best as she could, coughing as she dried her tears.
Yes, Sean Thompson. I know he did this.
We'll explore that option, ma'am. Until then, get some rest, if you can. And we'll contact you if we learn anything new.
Rebecca was sent back home as investigators sat down to hash out the latest details.
Becky Westerfeld said her counselor witnessed Jessica get in a fight with Sean over the phone, and she kept rubbing a necklace with the word taken on it.
And that necklace, gifted to her by Sean, is now missing.
So, do we think he raped her and snatched it back from her dead body? Gruesome, but possible.
Detective Sabin, we found Sean Thompson in Georgia.
Jim nearly dropped his coffee.
Georgia? What in blue blazes is he doing there?
Our boys down south say him and 5 others were on their way to a vacation in Florida. You can ask Sean yourself soon. They sent him back up to us.
Thanks, Vicky.
The sheriff put on his stern face while Sean nervously tapped the table and recalled everything from that night.
Our breakup was foolish. There was a party everyone was going to go to, and I thought she'd be there too, that we'd get back together. She didn't show up, so I left.
To Florida? Strange you'd skip town after your girlfriend shows up dead.
Sean looked up bewildered. He started to quiver, then held his head to hide his tears. Jim allowed the boy to have his moment, then tapped the table. Sean looked back up at him with red eyes.
Sir, I was running away to Florida because I was caught burglarizing a home. I didn't want to go to my court date and thought maybe...
His voice trailed off as he stared blankly at the wall.
I can't believe she's dead.
The tears are a great touch. We'll see if your DNA can back them up.
Sean's head nearly popped off as he looked up. 2 men entered and escorted him out as he tried to fight back and get more answers.
DNA for what? Was she raped or something?
All Sean could do was watch Sheriff Sabin walk off in the opposite direction without giving any other details. The officers pressed Sean by another room where a short-haired, blonde teenage boy sat with his arms crossed. This was George Cole, and he had been with Sean on their trip to Florida. Let me tell you, George was a real piece of work.
Looks like you can't keep your hands to yourself, bud. Look at all these sexual assault charges. You like taking advantage of your classmates?
What guy doesn't like sex?
I like consensual sex myself.
Bet you ain't getting a lot of that.
George's eyes transformed into those of a confused child as the detective joined in on his laughter.
You're one cocky little shit. I heard how you bragged to your friends about raping Jessica. How did you know she was murdered and raped?
George found himself at a loss for words. He tried to cover his fear by leaning back and stretching out his legs.
I wanted to impress the guys. Real men get laid whenever they want.
The detective forcefully grabbed George by his shoulder and guided him out of the room and to the cells.
You got a lot to learn about being a man, kiddo.
Like other sciences, DNA testing wasn't as advanced as it is today. Still, it was accurate enough to show neither Sean nor George had raped Jessica the night she was murdered. Pair that with no evidence appearing in the getaway car, and what other choice do you have but to release the boys? A lot of time was spent on Sean and his friends, and there was nothing to show for the work. With no new leads coming in, the outcome appeared bleak for Jim and Rebecca. More than a decade had gone by since Jessica Keene's murder, but Rebecca's determination for justice was as strong as ever. What would Jessica have been doing today if she was still alive? Could she have become an actress or singer like she'd always dreamed of? Or perhaps more realistically, she'd be opening up her veterinary clinic after studying zoology at Ohio State University. These thoughts passed through Rebecca's head as a car pulled up beside her at the red light. She turned to the man and watched as he fished inside his nose.
Did you kill my little girl?
The other driver finally found that troublesome nasal mucus and examined it, slowly rubbing it between his thumb and forefinger just a few seconds before popping it between his lips. Like the rest of us, Rebecca grimaced.
You're certainly disgusting enough.
The man turned and locked eyes with her. He nodded and politely waved, and Rebecca feigned pleasantries as the light turned green and they went their separate ways. Even during everyday events like this, Rebecca felt her mind slipping away and wondering what monster would have taken her daughter's life. The public certainly wasn't going to easily forget what happened to Jessica, as every so often the networks would run an Unsolved Mysteries special on her murder. Sheriff Sabin occasionally stopped at Foster Chapel Cemetery to retrace the cheerleader's steps, just in case something new popped up. Her footprints had long since vanished, but the fence and distant farmhouse remained. If only they could speak to him. But of course they couldn't, and maybe now it was time to pass the case along to a fresh set of eyes. Enter the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigations and Special Agent Greg Costas. He read over the old pages with a nod.
Alright, so they focused on this Sean and George. We can't do that anymore since their DNA rules them out, but the other 4 in the Florida car, maybe they're involved.
All 4 men submitted their DNA and partook in polygraph tests. None were a match, and all passed the tests.
Sean and his friends are out. Done, finished, adios.
Greg bit his pen and stared off into space for a new idea.
CODIS. It wasn't around yet when she was murdered. Maybe we can get a hit off her killer's DNA.
The Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, houses DNA profiles for individuals linked to violent crimes, allowing investigators all across the country to team up and perhaps trace where an unknown criminal from several years ago resides today. In 1996, Ohio law required anyone convicted of a violent crime to submit DNA to the state's database. Greg hoped Jessica's killer was found guilty of some other crime and wound up inside this database. Greg entered the lab and found remnants of evidence from days long gone. With the shuffle of a few vials, he located what he came for and lifted the clear test tube.
Found you, my little friend.
There was just one tiny problem. The DNA sample scraped from Jessica's body seemed to be gone. Panicked, Greg turned to forensic scientist Max Larajani.
Do not worry, Greg. The sample has been tested numerous times over the years, so naturally it is depleted. But if I can find at least one cell, I can make a match.
With a snap of his rubber gloves, Max took the sample and got to work. Greg returned to his office and prepared to wait whatever agonizingly long time he had to.
My God! We have a little something in there still. 17 years and it survived.
It was March 17th, 2008. 17 years to the day that Jessica was found, by the way, when Max input the DNA sample into CODIS. He bit down on his lip and prayed for a match. Greg waited impatiently in his office until...
Greg Costas.
Greg, thank God you answered. I'm going to make your day. Are you sitting down?
Greg looked around and flopped down into his desk chair.
Yeah, Max, give me the news.
The man you want is Marvin Lee Smith Jr.
Greg's brows knit together as he tried to figure out what exactly this meant. He slowly nodded his head.
Great, Max. Love it. Love it. Who the hell is Marvin Lee... whatever?
That is up to you to find out.
And find out he would. Research had taught Greg that Marvin had once lived in a part of Columbus known as the Short North, and 5 months after Jessica's murder, found himself guilty on 2 counts of robbery and kidnapping, unrelated to Jessica, of course. He was imprisoned for 9 years, during which he submitted a sample of his DNA. Presently, he lived in North Carolina, and Greg was determined to lock him back up. As Greg stepped away from a car and prepared for his flight out of CMH, an attorney put a gentle hand on his arm.
Remember, Greg, careful with your questions. If he realizes you found his sperm inside her, he could easily say they knew each other and had consensual sex the night she died.
Her mom would know he was lying.
The attorney raised an eyebrow.
You tell your mom about every girl you fucked when you were 15?
Right. I'll be cautious.
Greg waited patiently outside Marvin's job. coffee in his hand, sunglasses covering his eyes. He soon spotted the elderly gentleman leaving the building, his tight, curly gray hair shining in the sun. It was strange to see a killer walking slow and looking so frail, but soon became obvious the years had taken a toll on him.
There you are, dirtbag.
Greg pulled himself away from his car and carefully approached the killer. Marvin sat his bottle of soda on the picnic table while packing his red 100s.
Oh, good afternoon, sir.
Marvin said while saving his refried cigarette.
How can I help you today?
Marvin Lee Smith Jr.?
That's me.
Greg flashed his badge, and Marvin's facade fell.
Oh, hell. What now?
My buddy and I need to talk to you back at the office.
Marvin nervously fiddled with his blue vest and name badge as he sat at the interrogation room table. Greg entered with a file and slight smirk, then took a seat across from the hunched man. Greg licked his thumb, pulled out a photograph of Jessica, and placed it before Marvin.
You by chance know this young lady?
Marvin carefully examined it before shaking his head.
No, sir. Never seen her before.
Her name's Jessica Lynn Keene, and she was found raped and murdered in an Ohio cemetery back in '91.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Your DNA was on several different items at the crime scene.
How it got there, I don't know. Not by me. I can't explain that. I don't know the girl.
Greg smiled as he wrote down the number 1 and 18 zeros after it.
The statistics are that it's 1 in a quintillion that it's somebody other than you. Do you know how many zeros are in a quintillion?
A lot.
Marvin sat back defeated as Greg triumphantly laid the sheet of paper before him.
18 zeros, pal.
Marvin placed a sturdy hand on the table and glared up at Greg.
I don't know what you want me to say. I don't know who the hell that girl is.
I expect you don't. You picked her up from the bus stop because you needed to get your rocks off. It wasn't the first time you'd done something like that, Marvin. Only she was strong and escaped, which pissed you off. No little girl was getting away from you if you could help it. So you chased her down in the dark and bashed her over the head with a tombstone.
Marvin had turned away in silence.
I ain't never seen that bitch before.
We'll see what the Ohio courts say.
Marvin was extradited up to Ohio after a current DNA sample matched the one found on Jessica's body. Marvin must have had a damn good lawyer too, because in 2009, he avoided a death penalty trial in exchange for pleading guilty to aggravated murder with specifications of rape and kidnapping. Instead of death, Marvin was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison. But without a death penalty trial, we have to take what Marvin told the panel of 3 judges in the Madison County Common Pleas Court as the truth.
She got in my car and I raped her before she escaped. I chased her through the cemetery before beating her to death with the 70-pound grave marker. Hit her so hard the thing snapped in half.
His testimony certainly seemed to match the evidence. After the trial, Jessica's family would place a cross where she collided with the fence post. But before they could honor her memory, they watched as Marvin was dished his punishment. When Jim Sabin described her daughter's corpse, Rebecca had to leave the room. And then as Marvin pleaded guilty, she quivered. When it came time for the family to give their impact statements to Marvin, Rebecca gathered up her courage, looked the killer square in the eyes, and said,
Do you feel the heat? Do you feel his presence? Do you smell the sickening odor? He's right there smiling, standing right behind you. It's the devil himself ready to take you.
Whistle in the Graveyard, Summon the Devil was written and produced by me, Skylar Fastenau, with the voice talents of Jessica Buttafuoco, Jeremy Staple, Madeline Weymouth, Matthew McNally, Alan Anthony Morion, Daniel Jones, Sophia Sassone, and Carly Bell. Our beautiful new theme song was written and performed by Tracy Zales. Thank you for listening in on another chapter of the original Dead Time Stories. Now, I know you definitely loved what you just heard, but make sure the rest of the world and myself know just how much you enjoyed it by dropping a rating, review, or both on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, or whatever podcasting app you're using. It might not seem like much, but it helps us out more than you can imagine. You can also send us a message or comment on our post at the original Dead Time Stories on Instagram and Facebook. The links to those are in the episode description. I always love hearing from listeners like you, and spreading the word to your friends helps us continue making quality stories for you to enjoy. And speaking of quality stories, we'll be back before you know it with another chapter for you to enjoy. Until then, stay safe out there. I don't want you to become the next chapter's topic on the original Dead Time Stories.